really a pleasure to have been invited here to participate in the conference, and it's been really a wonderful experience being an attendee of the session so far, and to hear some of the talks, such as the previous one from Mark Schreiber, which was very inspirational, and it really hit a chord too, because my mother had Alzheimer's disease for 10 years before she died, and instinctively I could understand what many of the things that he talked about that were unspoken. Also, it's really a great opportunity for me to learn about various areas of working with people with disabilities that have relevance to my work as a psychiatrist, but which I would not have a chance to learn or to participate in. And so it's been really great. And it's really nice to be in an environment where faith and Catholicism has a real important part to play in understanding the conditions that are being discussed. And I come from a Catholic background, and actually from the very start, when I was in grade school through high school, I went to a Jesuit high school and a Jesuit university. And the last part of my education was in non-Catholic universities, and it's really a really nice opportunity for me to talk about areas of spiritual and religious concerns that are very relevant to working with people that have had trauma. And this part of this grows out of my experience prior to my work in the VA, but it also reflects some of the things that we're doing in Oregon within the Veterans Administration, where we don't have any active bases in Oregon, but there's a large National Guard contingent. And my office at the VA, which is the Regional Mental Illness Research Center, has been working with National Guard chaplains over the years, and we've done several different programs for faith communities in Oregon to help them understand some of the challenges facing veterans. Not necessarily the things that I'm going to be talking about today, but just general things related to deployment and redeployment, how faith communities can support veterans and their families within their communities. Actually, the Catholic population of Oregon is the largest denomination, but it's also relatively small compared to a lot of other states. So other Christian denominations are much more prominent in Oregon than Catholic churches are. So a lot of our work has been actually with Protestant chaplains within the National Guard, who have been wonderful to work with. Also, just to mention one other thing is that how I got interested in this area was through my work originally, not only with veterans when I was in my training, but also since the 80s when I did my fellowship and when I did my residency in Oregon. I've worked with people from all over the world who are refugees from very many different countries. And I started working with Cambodian and Vietnamese refugees in the mid-'80s at our intercultural psychiatric program at the Oregon Health and Science University, which is the only medical school in Oregon. And I was so interested that I wanted to get further training in cultural aspects of health. So during my fellowship that was funded by the Ronald Wood Johnson Foundation, I had a chance to get a degree in medical anthropology, which I use on a weekly basis because I work, besides this in the VA, I work 2 half-days a week in our intercultural program, and a half-day a week I see Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees, and another half-day seeing people from Latin America. So including all the part-time psychiatrists and residents in our program, between all of us, we see about 1,400 patients in this refugee living program. So people come from all different backgrounds, faith traditions, cultural traditions. And I'll talk a little bit about that today and how that affects recovery from trauma, along with focus on the veterans. So I wanted to mention to you that the great majority of people that come back from war, whether it's World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, do very well. And the the full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder affects about 1/5 of people. And if you look at statistics for veterans and statistics for people that have been survivors of other types of significant trauma, either as civilians who have survived war trauma or people that have survived significant natural disasters, the average rate of post-traumatic stress disorder across populations and across cultures is somewhere between 18 and 25%. So that doesn't mean that everybody else is fine, but there other people, and we don't know the hard numbers, but other people will have either short-term traumatic reactions or they will have mild symptoms over a period of time. Other people, for reasons we can't explain, have absolutely no post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's one of the most interesting things as a psychiatrist that I ask myself continuously is what makes a certain individual or a certain family more resilient than another. And it's a very interesting question that we don't have easy answers to. There are some risk factors that maybe make a person more prone to PTSD, but that doesn't mean that a person who hasn't had those risk factors will not develop PTSD. But there's things that make it more likely, and that includes a previous history of trauma. It also can include other coexisting medical or psychiatric conditions that they had before the trauma. It can include the degree of social or community support that a person has after the trauma. Those are all important factors. But these are very important and very common things that one would see in PTSD, either in civilians or in combat veterans. And sometimes they're subtle. A person may be a little bit more irritable than usual. They may seem more tired, listless, sluggish. That's because people that have PTSD don't sleep well. Fortunately, we have ways now I was telling Dr. Martinez that we have some really effective ways to treat those symptoms now, which make people much more amenable to psychological treatments and also recovery. Depression is almost universal in people that have PTSD. So maybe there might be 10 to 20% of people that I see that just have post-traumatic stress and don't have depression. So it's unusual not to have them both together. Difficulty with emotional feelings, getting close to other people. And unfortunately, people try, and it makes me sad actually to see this when people come in after they've had symptoms for a while, because they don't want to seek help, they don't want to seem weak or that they need help, but people often self-medicate, and they will use alcohol or other types of substances to try to get to sleep, to try to get rid of their nightmares, try to treat their own symptoms. And unfortunately, it just makes it worse because alcohol disrupts sleep physiology, and it of course causes a lot of other problems for people. By the way, I definitely will keep some time in this session, at least 10 minutes, for us to talk and to ask questions, etc. So as you're thinking of questions, or you're thinking of even people that you know or that you encountered that are dealing with some of these things, feel free to bring that up. But these are almost universal reactions that people have after trauma. So people are much more aware of the unpredictability of life and death, the fragility of life, and the way things occur in life that are totally unpredictable. So there's no warning. You know, 1 minute something can be fine, the next minute they're not. Or, you know, I've worked with a lot of veterans over the years who were in situations, in firefights or other types of situations, where the person right next to them was killed and they were untouched. And people wonder, you know, how could that happen? Why did that happen to this person? Why didn't it happen to me? It was just a few feet away. You know, so in any kind of traumatic situation, there's going to be some kind of loss. And that can be the loss of companionship, it can be the loss of innocence, so to speak, it can be the loss of a limb, it can be all kinds of losses you can think of. And refugees that I work with who have come from a different country have lost oftentimes obviously their own community. Sometimes especially Cambodians that I've worked with who lived during the Pol Pot regime, they're the only survivor of their entire family. So there are incredible losses that people have, and sometimes they're less intense losses, but losses nonetheless. So those come into play in trauma. And then there's a quite incredible moral complexities that people deal with. During the acute trauma, people have to make split-second decisions oftentimes. And people have to live with those decisions. And this is something that I've seen cross-culturally, regardless of religious or spiritual background, is that people say, okay, did I do the right thing? What did I do that maybe contributed to the problem? What didn't I do that could have prevented it? So people often replay in their mind for years this dilemma. And unless they talk about it with somebody else who they trust, they're the only person that's making the judgment about whether they either did something right or did something wrong. So it's this vicious circle that occurs when people keep things to themselves. But at the same time, one of the most difficult things for people who have suffered some type of traumatic event or loss is to trust. Is not only to trust themselves, but to trust other people. And that's a challenge as a clinician. Now, since we're going to be talking a little bit about religious or spiritual issues, I just want to make a couple of comments as a introduction. These are things that have been recognized by anthropologists in all types of cultures about what role does religion play in society, in culture, regardless of the religious tradition. And religion does serve as a explanation of how things began, how life is maintained, and what happens when life ceases to exist. And every major religion in the world deals with an explanation of the meaning of life and the rationale for suffering. And also, each religious tradition has a certain set of symbols and beliefs and values. And just, of course, the Mass is a perfect example of that for Catholics. And no matter where you go in the world, there's going to be a certain structure to that Mass, or a certain set of symbols that you recognize no matter where you are. So cultural differences influence variations, but there's a core set of symbols and, of course, a core set of beliefs. And then religion helps to explain some of the relationship between all of us and each other, and also the natural world. Spirituality is a little bit broader and doesn't necessarily have to do with organized religion. So I see patients all the time who may have some type of spiritual organization or spiritual organizing principle, so to speak, of how they see the world and what is important for them. But they may not have a specific religious tradition. And spiritual issues often will help to bridge for people religious beliefs and science. And how does faith interdigitate with scientific fact or scientific knowledge? Spirituality helps to deal with the relationship between the self and others, similar to religion, but a little bit broader. It helps to influence personal values, meaningful purpose for life, and connectedness between the self and the natural or supernatural. Being from I grew up in Cleveland, and I lived there until I went to Oregon to do my psychiatry training. But since I've been living in Oregon, people will often get away to the mountains, or just they feel like if they need a break, they just go for the mountains and sort of get lost for a couple of days just to get away. But I know there's a lot of veterans that I've worked with who have lived in Oregon and Washington who, in order to get away from things or just the pressure of life, will just want to go to their favorite river, get up near their favorite mountain, and just, in a sense, meditate or just be away from pressures. So the natural environment serves as a spiritual inspiration for those folks. So these are just some of the, here's just a summary of some of the major world religions and how the explanatory frameworks deal with pain and suffering, atonement, forgiveness. And of course, a core element of Christianity, and especially Catholicism, or specifically Catholicism, is repentance, forgiveness, and rebirth. And one of the most difficult things for survivors, and particularly combat veterans who may have killed, which is obviously something that's prohibited normally in everyday life, they have to somehow come to some resolution for why they had to do that. And forgiveness, in one way or another, often enters into the calculation. About half of all of my Cambodian patients and about half of my Vietnamese patients are Buddhist. So they may have a very different perception of how the trauma fit into their entire life and how it influences their future. So there may be a greater emphasis on fate, and also, since there is a belief in reincarnation, the person may believe, and I've encountered this many times over the years, may believe that, okay, well, life has been really bad in this life, but maybe in the next life it might be better. So it does keep people going. So this is just an example of very general concepts of how religion affects suffering. So these are some other core assumptions that are altered by trauma that you may encounter at a parish level in working with a combat veteran. And again, this would not be somebody that necessarily has post-traumatic stress disorder, but these are normal things that people often have to deal with after coming back from a war zone, where they've seen a lot of suffering and a lot of things that most of us never have to see. And again, many of these folks, less so in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, because there's a broader range of ages of people serving there. But particularly in World War II and Vietnam, many soldiers were in their late teens, early 20s. And so that's a period of great change for people. And the person's identity is just being solidified at that time. So a new belief in personal invulnerability is very, that's jarring at that age for most people, because they don't feel that they're vulnerable at all until until they enter a war situation. The perception of an understandable world that operates by a set of laws and rules and predictability, that gets shaken by trauma. And then one of the biggest things is trust in oneself and other people. And certainly, you'll see that when you're reaching out to people who may be just tentatively testing out the waters of getting back into a community or trusting again. And there's a lot of avoidance, secondary avoidance that occurs because of the lack of trust. And also for people that actually do have post-traumatic stress disorder. Withdrawing from others and withdrawing into oneself and being isolated is a way to cut down on the hypervigilance and the sensitivity to sensory stimulation that people have that's completely involuntary. The reacting to a loud noise, when a phone rings or somebody knocks at the door, or I was just talking with my sister a few weeks ago, and she has a very good friend who has a son that just came back from Afghanistan. And she relayed the story of when this was a week or two after he came back, she went to wake him up from a nap and didn't know that she should not touch him. And he just, he didn't mean to, but he actually hit his mom because he was so startled by being awakened. And people learn not to come up behind the person and tap them on the shoulder, and they're not going to react well to that. So being isolated is one way that people counteract it. So these are things that you will see whether you're a clinician, a family member, a parishioner, that people are going to be dealing with at some level, even though they might not always talk about it. Feeling a sense of security, safety, accepting, and that sometimes that can occur, that requires a long time to accept what is a very difficult experience or series of experiences. Identity and self-worth. For instance, what makes me still a worthy person? What makes, am I still somebody that can love and be loved? That comes up. Social connectedness. Again, these things affect that. In PTSD and other milder forms of traumatic stress, dealing with grief and mourning is essential. And that's where ritual, tradition can be very helpful. So churches and faith communities can be very helpful in helping a person deal with grief and going through the mourning process that often can't occur in the situation that caused the trauma in the first place. So if a soldier loses somebody in his unit, or a company commander loses a couple of his men in combat, he's not going to be able to take the time to mourn adequately because he's going to be too distracted. So that actually has to occur later, but it still has to occur. Also, people sometimes are very angry about what happened to them. They want some type of revenge. They're angry at God sometimes. And that doesn't mean, as a psychiatrist, that I'm not a priest or I'm not a minister. There's only a certain limit to what I can do. But to recognize that the person may be angry at God or angry at all kinds of things is an important thing for me to know, because it will affect his or her behavior. Reasserting a sense of control in life is very prevalent for people that have had trauma. And sometimes people that have had a series of traumatic situations, it could be child abuse, it could be some type of other accident, it can be combat. Sometimes people feel that, why, what can I do? I wasn't able to prevent these things that happened to me. So why should I plan ahead? Why should I try to assert any kind of control over my life? So people become helpless oftentimes. And part of our role as clinicians, mental health providers, is to give some sense of control back to the person. And we don't deny what happened to them, but we try to give them tools to be able to be a little bit more proactive. Meaning is very important. And there's a brilliant book that I first read when I was in high school, and called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he was a psychiatrist who he himself had survived concentration camps in Germany. And he talked about his own search for meaning in his life after that type of horrendous experience. And whether a person is an American soldier or a Vietnamese refugee or a person from Latin America, I've seen that universally, where people say, okay, I'm not sure what to do with the rest of my life. I'm not sure what's going to provide meaning for myself. What should I do to be able to go on with my life after what happened to me? So meaning is really important. And of course, religious and spiritual guidance can be very helpful in establishing that meaning. So these are some of the barriers that you'll see in your relationships with people, and I see as a clinician, as a doctor. These are very, very important in working with veterans. So avoidance. People don't want to deal with these kinds of issues because they're just so difficult to express. And people want to be self-reliant. They don't want to depend on other people. They don't want to be seen as weak. And as a psychiatrist, I see this all the time, is that people think that they have to be crazy to come to see a psychiatrist. And there's a lot of stigma towards mental health conditions. And in psychiatry, most of us deal with a very wide range of people. Because within a week of my practice, I see people with chronic psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. I see people with dementia. I see people with post-traumatic stress, depression. Some of it's very, very acute and short-lived. Some of it's chronic. I see people with time-limited family problems or relationship problems or all kinds of things. So there's a lot of self-imposed stigma about getting help. And this is a huge thing for veterans, is that the provider or even the family member will not understand or believe you. And I've been co-running a group for 25 years now for World War II and Korean era POWs. And many of these guys are in their late 80s and early 90s now. And over the years, as people have come and gone from the group, one of the very common themes is, well, when I've often asked people, well, when you came back in 1946 or 1945, could you have talked about some of these things that you experienced? Did I do this right? Did I do this wrong? Et cetera, et cetera. Men have often said, well, I started talking about such and such with somebody that I thought I could trust, but I could tell that they didn't believe me, or that they didn't think that what I experienced really happened. And it's hard for people to listen. It is very hard to listen to some of these stories. And you know, there are some days where I go home and I'm really tired because, you know, especially if there's been a new patient that I've seen, say, who's just for the first time talked with somebody about experiences that are very traumatic. And so someone who's a family member or somebody who's a trusted friend who knows the person and has an intimate relationship with them, that may even be more difficult because you don't know how to help them. So there's a lot of fear on the part of the individual that people won't accept them or won't believe them. So that we have plenty of time to talk, I wanted to summarize a few things that I've discussed. And these are some of the things that I think are really helpful in healing in the area of religious and spiritual issues. And obviously, some of these pertain to any type of healing. Telling the story honestly. And that's one of the most difficult things to do because you have to have some kind of trust in the person that you're talking to. Ending your isolation. You know, you still have to take that first step and put your toe in the water and take a chance at ending your isolation, which often is a very gradual process. I don't mean necessarily a systematic moral inventory, but what I'm talking about is being willing to talk with somebody else. It could be a pastor, it could be a deacon, it could be a mental health person, about these questions that you have about morality that may have been breached at the time of the war trauma. Forgiveness. I've had many vets over the years, and a couple of them that really stand out particularly, that have said to me, and they didn't know that I was a Catholic, or they didn't know that I had any kind of religious orientation at all. But for them, they said, well, it's been helpful for me to go to church in some ways because, and these were non-Catholics, by the way, and they said, I know that God has forgiven me, but I still can't forgive myself. So there's a sense of collective forgiveness, but that internal forgiveness is not there. And for some people that may never occur because you can't force that to occur. You know, as a friend or a family member or as a clinician, you can't force that. But I've seen it on a couple of different occasions where finally getting to that self-forgiveness was totally liberating. And it's interesting to see how people get there and what it takes to get there. Part of getting there involves these last two. And this is where social action, participation in communities can be very helpful. Being able to help other people, being able to reach outside of yourself, take that chance that you're going to be okay. And being encouraged by your community to do that. That is really special. That's very helpful. And then being able to give love and receive love. In what we call the DSM-4, which is for psychiatry, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, there is a criterion or a symptom of PTSD, which is called emotional detachment or estrangement from other people. That's sort of like the medical or the technical term that's given to what this really is. So if somebody can reach this stage, that is remarkable and is very helpful for healing. I'm just going to mention a couple of examples of actual statements by veterans. And these were statements made to one of my colleagues in Oregon. And he and I have done a couple of presentations over the years at professional conferences with other mental health providers about this particular topic that we're talking about today. And these are a few things that have been said to Dr. Dewey. He's my colleague. This was the wife of a World War II infantryman. We were regular churchgoers before the war. He was a good Christian. He could never understand after the war how God could forgive him for all he had seen and done. It changed our life in that respect. He felt like a hypocrite going to church. We tried to go together for a while, but he was just too uncomfortable. Here's another one. This is from a World War II airman. I don't love anybody anymore. I like some people, but it seems I won't let myself love anyone again. All the killing hardened me up. It affects your marriage. It affected mine. And these last two are statements where you can tell people are healing, or they have gotten to a point where they're doing much better. This is from a Vietnam War Special Forces officer with 3 tours in Vietnam. You have to give up even justified bitterness and hate to fully heal the emotional and spiritual wounds. Here's another one from a World War II Marine in the South Pacific. You feel better when you are giving your time to help others. It takes your mind off the bad stuff. It's better to try to save and help than to kill. So these are obviously people who are at various different stages. These are some reactions that we as clinicians and family members and other people who know trauma survivors or combat trauma survivors sometimes have to deal with. These are our own feelings. Sadness at the kinds of experiences that people have. Anger at the conditions that created the trauma in the first place. Vulnerability. When you hear stories over and over again, it makes you feel more vulnerable because you have a different sense of what safety is. Sometimes fatigue. Intolerance of sort of quote everyday unquote problems, that people have that cause them to seek help. And you have to be very careful of that as a clinician. Intolerance and avoidance of, it should be violent images. So compared to 25 years ago, I'm much less tolerant of violence that I see in the media, or, it's annoying for me sometimes if I'm going to a film, sitting through the previews,
Yes.
I'm sure you can all relate to that. It's numbing, and where violence becomes entertainment. And I have a number of patients that I've seen over the years from Latin America who have a really hard time around Halloween because of the imagery of death and skeletons, and it's those types of images are closer to their background, and but it takes on a very different meaning after traumatic experiences. And then indifference versus over-involvement. So protecting yourself by withdrawing too much is not good, but over-involvement so that you don't have enough perspective to help the individual or help other people is it's weighing that back and forth is very difficult. And at the parish level, in being able to help a parishioner or a family who a person who's deployed or who's coming back from deployment, where there's some problems, what are the proper boundaries there? You know, how involved can you get as an individual? How much should you rely on a collective community to help some people that might be in trouble? So these are some ethical principles that we deal with as professionals, but I think apply it in even non-professional situations. Really doing as much as possible to create trust and predictability, not causing any harm.